Dreverman.
There we go. And a friend of mine has had you in class several times. That's how it was recommended to us. He's going to lead us in a discussion.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Matthias Beier, and I'm very grateful that I have been invited to speak with you today. When Jen and I first talked and met, I was asked to talk about God outside the box, because that's what I really teach, God outside the box. I will tell you a little bit about how I got there. I was in Germany. I grew up in Germany, and I went through seminary in Reutlingen, Western Germany. And in Germany, you have to actually do 1 year of internship before you even enter seminary. And during that year, I had experienced quite a lot of challenges in terms of people who were confiding into me a lot of serious emotional problems, questions, and I had no answer to it. And I don't believe that we have to have answer to it, but I didn't know how to be with the person in that distress, really in a way that would be helpful. I knew the Bible and so on, but when somebody is in despair and doesn't feel, and you may have experienced that yourself, I at times have experienced times where things were really rough, no phrases can really do anything at that point. You need to know how to be with someone at that point, or you need to have somebody to be with you. So that's why I got interested in studying psychology and how it relates to theology. And what I found in the process, and this is where my book becomes relevant, I found that so often faith was used in a way that was not helping a person, but adding really more burdens on top of the problem, where God became like a demon. And when God becomes a demon, he's got nowhere to go. That's the worst thing that you can be in. Some writers of great literature have really expressed this exquisitely, like Dostoevsky. If you've read any of his novels, amazing ingenuity how he feels it out. At the time I was studying in Germany, there was a big debate going on around the Catholic priest, Eugen Dreverman. He had written a lot of books interpreting the Bible from a therapeutic perspective. But he did it in a way that touched on freedom, on how we can really live free and genuine and authentic, so that we would not feel that faith could be a shackle for our spirit. And he got in trouble with Rome. Dreverman would say, we cannot keep using the Bible to condemn people. That was never the purpose of Jesus. Now, interestingly, Cardinal Ratzinger, who then became Pope, got wind of all of this, and in 1986, and I describe this in my book, he wrote a letter to Dreverman's Archbishop and said that Rome is reading his books and that Rome is very concerned, gravely concerned, and instructed his Archbishop to take all measures necessary. For 3 years, this was constantly on primetime news. Bishop Kasper, he ended up being a really significant cardinal in Rome, debated him. It was like soccer matches that people would watch, really drawing large audiences. Long story short, eventually his license to teach Catholic theology was revoked and he was suspended from priesthood. He was never defrocked, but he was suspended. Marcus Borg wrote me once that he just admires his work. And I'm in the process of getting a lot of this work translated into English. I work as a pastoral psychotherapist. I teach at CTS. We have a mental health counseling master's program where we train mental health counselors for licensure. But we are adding spiritual reflection on it. And it is so important when people are in despair. You cannot just use manualized treatments. You just can't. You have to really listen also to the spiritual struggles and how at times messages like "you're no good if you don't do ABC" have really imprisoned a person's spirit and soul. Especially the moralization of faith is very often at the heart of it. that we have been taught so much how to do things and what to do, but we really have very often not learned how to be ourselves. Because so often the message of Jesus, of the cross, has been used in opposition to ourselves. So that the big, omnipotent, narcissistic God is pitted against this obstreperate, bad self, that disobedient will that needs to be broken. And then on top, the example that is used is Jesus. The cross of Jesus is very often used as an example of that's what you need to endure. God wants you to be like Jesus, meaning let yourself be crucified. All your desires, all your will, let go of it. That's a moralistic interpretation of God. And it's extremely harmful. Because you cannot win. Can you win? Can you win? No. You know, sometimes I experience this in work with executives. It's sort of like your boss. You've got no chance. You've got no chance against that kind of boss. You've just got to do what you got to do, right? Otherwise you get fired. Now, if that's projected onto God, you're in real deep, and you can fill in the other words, trouble, right? So I want to go with you through a story in the Bible that gives you an example of how a biblical story can be read in a liberating way. And it's a story that very often in the history of Christianity has been used to demonize people, actually. It's the story in Mark 5, the so-called Gerasene demoniac. And I had a patient who actually had heard a sermon about that story and wondered whether she was possessed by a demon, just like that person. When you read the Bible, how do you read it? What do you do with it, besides having it on the shelf?
Try to understand it.
Try to understand it? Okay.
Journal.
Journaling? When you journal, what do you do with it?
I sometimes go back and read it. I kind of put my thoughts down. And then I guess in doing that, it kind of opens up different things to me. And also now I'm in Bible study, so we have a guide. And that asks a lot of open-ended questions that I have never really thought about. How would you do what the person in the story that we read?
Very good. Yeah.
Or how does this relate to your circumstances?
How does this relate to you?
Ezekiel, well, we were. And
yeah.
I never fill in the blank. I just think about it. They tell us to fill in the blank. That's right.
Okay. Sounds like you're followers of Jesus, right? He never listened to instructions, right?
In a much shallower way, I just always read it realizing it was written by men.
There you go. And what do you do with that?
I argue with it a lot.
All right. Good. So you want to argue with me? I'm a man too, right?
Well, you know female, but
yes.
you know back then the female didn't amount to anything.
Well, you know, there's actually a lot of research that is later interpretation. The women were sort of blotted out in the early Christian story.
Yes.
They were there, actually.
Had to be.
Yes. Otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? That makes sense, right? Yeah. But one of my colleagues, I got my doctorate from Drew University, and one of my colleagues, Dr. Virginia Burris, has done a lot of work on the role of women in the early church. They were tremendously influential. A lot of it was really blotted out, was erased. What we don't know about Mary Magdalene and many of the other women that are mentioned doesn't mean that they were not active. It was later interpreted. And that's the same with the Bible itself, actually, in other areas. Since you have gone through Bible study, a lot of the final version of biblical texts really were written 30, 40 years after Jesus had died, and the church had certain intentions behind putting it this way. So that's where critical scholarship is really important, and there's a lot of great feminist critical scholarship these days. So what I'm hearing is that you feel very comfortable to put yourself into the story, to see yourself into the story. In a way, that's what Dreverman said the Catholic Church needs as well, and I think that's not just the Catholic Church. The history of Christianity is full of somebody in authority telling everyone else what it means. Now, there's something to be said for scholarship, because if we know that certain things just don't mean what the text really says, then it can be helpful. We can read the Bible related to ourselves in many ways. We can read it as social commentary, social deconstruction, and so on, which is really important. A lot of this is very significant. But also personally, I see the Bible in many respects as a document that tries to help us in the progression, to help us see that what really counts does not decimate us. What really counts does not hollow us out. What really counts does not destroy us, but wants to help us live. The Bible is there to help us liberate. Another very well-known Jewish scholar of the New Testament, Dr. Amy Jill Levine, has written a book together with others, The Annotated Jewish New Testament. She goes into all kinds of examples of how certain verses have been used for domestic violence, and how even in the text they're usually not meant that way. It's fascinating. The social deconstruction is very important. To make it more personal, I invite you to read stories, especially the healing stories in the Bible, whether they're in the Hebrew Scripture or in the Second Testament or New Testament, how we call it, as if they were dreams that you just had last night. Now, some of you that may have interest in literature may say, well, but they're not all in the genre of dreams. So forget about that for a moment. Try to personalize the stories and try to see that these stories and all the characters in the stories are you, part of all of them, in your search for some ground to stand on in life. Because one of the most significant things about being human is that we know ultimately there's no ground to stand on. That's part of what our unique human spirit does. There's no ground you can stand on. If you really sit for 20 minutes in a room alone by yourself, and you really turn everything over, there's nothing you can stand on when it comes to your final moment in life. And so, read these stories in light of that experience. And that's how I'm going to go through this story right now, of Mark 5, 1 through 20. Now, there's a lot in there. I'm going to first go through the story, and we can talk about it, and then I'm going to give you a interpretation that I have in my German book. It's translated, but I have to publish it and go through it. It's called God Without Fear, Gott ohne Angst. And a lot of the distortions that happen around God and God language and God images happen by using God to induce fear. And you know that the best way to control people is to make them afraid. And that happens in individual ways, and that happens in collective ways. And so, in one of the chapters here, I portray my work with the patient that I mentioned, who worked with this story quite a bit. This story is usually called the demoniac of Gerasene, or the possessed of Gerasene. It's really, in my view, a story about the effects of putting God in a box. The story starts this way. They came to the other side of the lake, to the country of the Gerasene. Now, in the Bible, and if you have dreams about another side, it usually means there is another side to your life. This is the opening of the story. Jesus is coming to a totally different side, and it's about this man's life. It's a totally different side in this man's life. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. Jesus gets out of his boat. He doesn't stay in his own boat. He gets into another person's shoes, if you want to say it that way. And there's this man who lives among the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. What is an unclean spirit? What do you think? A demon? Okay, what does that mean? He'll do evil. Okay, mental health issues, demon. What spirit? Do we all have a spirit?
Most of us do.
Yes. Does it at times feel dirty? Dirty? Sully?
I would interpret that as just sinful.
Exactly, yes, I know. And how did you learn that?
Beats me.
There you go. Yes. Sinful usually means did something wrong, right? He got in the wrong way, and so he's all messed up, right? That's not what this means. No. That's what we usually think of it. It's a superficial reading. It's on the level of deed. It's on the level of things. We're not talking about a sinful deed here. We're talking about an unclean spirit. An unclean spirit is a spirit that has been dirty, that feels dirty. Your core feels dirty. It has nothing to do with doing. You feel worthless. You feel you should be dead. That's what an unclean spirit is. You feel no one should have to bear you. You feel useless. That's what an unclean spirit is. And very often, yes, the voices that come to us is, I'm unclean because I didn't do that, or I did do that, or blah, 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 blah. But this is exactly what that story is about. This story tells us how this man has been demonized. Fortunately, we use the word in English in this way that we understand. Demonizing doesn't mean necessarily that you are really demon-possessed. Anyone here ever have worked on a psychiatric unit or been on one? A lot of what we do in our society is we demonize people. I really believe that the way we get at mental health is all backwards. We don't have time for people to really experience themselves because everyone has to be useful. We want to help people in 12 sessions. It's a terrible thing. There's no space for our spirit and our soul to really be listened to. Now let's go through the story further. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. Just imagine. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Now we learn why he has an unclean spirit. Everyone wants to control him. Everyone wants to chain him. You go out of your mind if everyone wants to chain you.
But isn't it true that they're not going to want to chain him unless he's trying to harm someone else? You don't go around subduing people just for the heck of subduing them.
Not part of the story. He doesn't want to harm anybody in this story.
And I think you're leaving out some of the backstory there.
Well, let's go into the backstory. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. He beat himself up. That is his unclean spirit. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. He is not trying to control anybody there. He is servile. And that's part of his problem. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" He feels that God is like a demon that also comes to him. "I adjure you by God, do not torment me." And this is the other part. He doesn't just see God like a demon. He also invokes God for help. Do not torment me. This is what we call an ambivalent God image. He sees God sometimes as the demon and sometimes as the rescuer. And you can't live with a God like that. For, and this is Jesus, had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Jesus had asked the unclean spirit to come out of the man. And this is the reaction Jesus got. Everything came out. The good God image that protects him, the bad God image that wants to torment him. And the way Jesus helps him break out of this is, he asks him, "What is your name?" What is your name? Did anyone ever ask this man, "What is your name"? This is, in my view, what psychotherapy really should be about, what mental health should be about. What is your name, really? And what can he say? He can't even talk about himself, actually. He says, my name is Legion, for we are many. He doesn't know his name. He does not know his name. That's his unclean spirit. He has not been allowed to know his name. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, send us into the swine, let us enter them. So Jesus gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the lake, and were drowned in the lake. I know we don't have much time to go into all of this, so let me go to what my patient did with this. My patient was very depressed. You could not have told. She was a good sport. She did all kinds of work in church. She had so many offices in church. She gave almost all her money away. You would not have said to her that she is sinful based on all of that. But she felt utterly depressed. When she asked me about whether she might be possessed by an evil spirit, like that man, she asked this question because this is exactly what she did to herself. She would beat herself up with recriminations, with self-accusations. I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I should have. And I sometimes wonder, if there's anyone who lives like a saint, it's her. In what we think of as saints. Instead of reading this story as an exorcism of some metaphysical spirit that comes in and demonizes the person, what we got at is how so many voices in her soul demonize her. In the work with me, she again and again says that she does not know who she really is. She hears all the voices of others in her life, her mother, her father who left her as a child, the siblings, the people in church, at work, and so on. They all seem to know what she must do, why she lives. Only she does not find herself in the midst of all of these voices. She's always afraid disappointing others and being dismissed as a pathetic failure. These are her words, pathetic failure. She has no feeling for herself. The thing she really remembered about the sermon was that legion means many. And she was being pulled into all kinds of directions of what she should do. I asked her whether she felt like an occupied territory. And that's what she felt like. Now that's historically, the story is probably dealing with socially, partly the occupation that was going on politically at the time. But again, that we can see as a social thing, which is really helpful when there are social structures that are oppressive, but also internally. When you feel like an occupied territory, the question that Jesus asks is, what is your name? Who are you? One of the most powerful things that Martin Luther King Jr. said that inspired everyone was, you are somebody. His is a theology of somebodiness. And every piece that is being said about God that puts you down in a way that says you're nobody, well, it's your spirit. That's an unclean spirit. Meaning, that's not your spirit. When I pointed to the question about what is your name, this was a crucial moment in our therapeutic work. This was like a revelation to her. She'd never thought of that. It meant so much, like, what do I really want? Who am I really? What should I be? She always had done what everyone else wanted. In our therapeutic search for her own name, because this is not something that she all of a sudden, oh, that's my name, right? A lot of these stories you can think of as condensations of a process of 7 to 10 years. This doesn't happen overnight, these stories. But these were the effects people experienced as they encountered somebody who spoke of God as life-giving and not as deadening. That is who Jesus was. That distinguished him, by the way, from John the Baptist. John the Baptist was really good at breaking out of all of the structure that kills our spirit or that distorts it. But he did it in kind of a wrathful way, like the old prophet. What Jesus did is he took it out of this ascetic thing of, oh, you have to be in ashes and sackcloth. Jesus was different. He did not hide himself and not eat and drink. He ate and drank and partied. This brings us to the swine. What about the swine? She confronted all the parts, and I have permission to talk about this. All the parts that she feels inwardly are dirty, revolting, repulsive, swinish. And as we looked at those, she more and more had a sense of humor. And she asked me one time, "But I feel sympathy for the pigs. Why did Jesus chase the pigs into the lake?" She said that in a laughing, half-serious manner. So, knowing the story, fortunately, I asked her, "Well, did he really chase them into the sea?" No, they themselves ran there. They wanted to go in there as soon as the legion goes into them. So she concluded that it was the many voices, the legion, that condemned her as swinish, and thus obtained power over her. What doesn't let her know her name has to do with these voices making her feel you are dirty. If somebody does that to you, you can't think straight. And if somebody has done that for a long time in your life, that you're swinish, that your desires are swinish, that your longings are swinish, that your aspirations are swinish and dirty. She was afraid that I, as a therapist, would not want to put up with her swinish feelings of longing, including her self-hatred and fear, because that all got into the mix. It was sort of a vicious cycle. You can't really want to be with me because I am constantly hating myself. Yet every time when she let out a little of the voices, she had the paradoxical experience of feeling less swinish, because the disaster wouldn't happen that I would throw her out. It was as if the pigs really went under. They came out, and, well, they weren't really as dirty as we thought, right? Less and less she has had to beat herself up. And the less the inner voices, these internalized voices from the past that have determined who she is, controlled her, the less she felt swinish for her own feelings and thoughts. This is tough, very tough. So it meant that the voices, together with their disparaging accusations, went under. It was most difficult for her to believe that God wants her freedom from these voices. For God seemed like the sanctifying agent of all these voices. Gradually she began to see God differently. Perhaps it could be, she thought, that God does not condemn her, but wants to free her from her suffering. I want to stop here and see if you have any thoughts, reactions about the story for yourself.
Reaction is it makes a lot of sense for them.
Is there anything lost to not having a devil who puts little demons in our minds? If we read a story like this,
we talk about voices and voices beyond. Those were the negative, burdening voices. There's many other voices that are there too. So Jesus is the voice of what you're telling us, and our voices in our head, things we've learned throughout. So it's in that realm, our spirit's full of voices. And I guess what you're saying is filter.
Yes, there's a criterion for whether the voices really are legion or whether they allow you to live. So not all voices are equal. Now you mentioned the word negative. There are, of course, voices that can be all positive. That's what advertising is all built on. Buy this, and you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? And we get your money. And you have to slave yourself to death to buy more, right? Yes, it can go both ways. It's when there's falseness. Now, we are a society that doesn't prize authenticity a lot. We like appearance. We like to emphasize how we look to others. So one of the ways that God is being put in a box is by being reduced to the voice of others, including mine, of course. Anything you take from this should only be taken if it somehow resonates with your own search. Otherwise, it's not you. There's something that Jesus did. He trusted in the ability of this man to have his own mind, and that's the end of the story. Because at the very end, as you may recall from this story, and this scared everyone, at the very end, in verse 15, they came to Jesus. These are the swineherds. These are the ones who made sure that you feel swinish. Now, they didn't have anything to look over anymore, and that was really scary. So they came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there. And this is the very first time that the term demoniac is actually used in this story. Jesus doesn't call him a demoniac. They see him as a demoniac. They saw him sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. The very man who had the legion. And they were afraid. How can we sit there and be in our right mind? That is what the gospel is trying to help us figure out. For Jesus, from all we know about Jesus, he encountered people in a way where he believed in them. The Gospel of Matthew is all about belief. In most of the stories, Jesus doesn't say, hey, God is going to do blah, blah, blah. Most of the stories are, your faith has healed you. Now, we have made out of this a dogmatic. Oh, they believe Jesus is the Son of God. The way Jesus became the Son of God for people is because they felt that he really let them live. That's when God is there. It's the effect, it's not the dogmatic formula that he was after. So, the gospel is there to help us be in our right mind. And this is a struggle, because a lot of it means looking at all the voices, taking them on one by one. You can't take them on all at once. Others?
So did your patient come to you with this story, or did you?
She did come to me.
With this story,
yes.
And the story was troubling her, this
yes.
particular
yes.
story in the
yes.
Bible?
Yes, she was afraid that she was demon-possessed, that her depression was like that. And so then we looked at it. She's not depressed anymore. She knows much more who she is, and she isn't masochistic like this anymore. One of the passages in the Bible, Matthew 16:24, where Jesus says, those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? This has so often been used to bang on people's souls and spirits. Jesus never meant that our self should be killed off. Jesus was about our falseness being taken apart. Our false self. In psychology, the interesting thing is that modern psychology has all these terms about a false self and a true self, and we often don't bring this together. But that's basically what he wanted. He didn't want to bang anyone over the head, especially not with the symbol of the cross. The symbol of the cross was not to self-mutilate. It was to say we don't have to be afraid of anything anymore. Nobody. I'm not even afraid of dying. But it was not to sanctify the killing and then to say, oh, let yourself be killed. That's another story, right? Okay. Thank you very much.